There are moments in life that look completely ordinary on the surface, yet something deeper is quietly unfolding underneath them. You meet someone, talk for a while, continue your routine, and assume nothing special is happening. But inside, something subtle begins to shift. A feeling forms without warning. A sense of familiarity appears without explanation. A person may enter your life and feel strangely known, even before they are truly understood. Their presence starts occupying space in your thoughts in a way you cannot easily explain. A simple smile feels meaningful. A short conversation becomes memorable. And long after the moment has passed, it returns in your mind again and again. Some people believe this happens because the human mind is not driven only by logic or conscious choice. Deep within us exists another level of awareness, where emotions, memories, and hidden desires quietly influence how we experience others. And sometimes, when you meet someone, they seem to awaken something already waiting inside you. Not because they complete you, but because they reveal something you had not yet noticed about yourself. Stay with this, because it becomes even deeper than it first appears. In many cases, the strongest emotions are never spoken out loud. They grow in silence. A person may feel something intense from the very beginning, but instead of expressing it, they hold it back. Not because it is small, but because it feels too important to risk. What if speaking changes everything? What if honesty breaks what silence has preserved? So they stay close, but quiet. They continue normal conversations while carrying something far more complex inside. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and sometimes even years pass like this. Yet unspoken feelings do not fade easily. They grow roots. Every interaction becomes layered with meaning. Every memory becomes sharper than it should be. They remember details you never thought mattered. They notice changes in you that others miss completely. From the outside, everything looks simple, but internally, there is a private emotional world no one can see, and at some point, silence becomes heavier than fear. The mind starts questioning, is it safer to remain hidden, or more painful to stay unspoken forever? That internal conflict slowly pushes emotions toward the surface, and when that moment comes, everything feels different, as if something long paused is finally ready to move again. At a deeper level, this kind of connection often comes from how the mind mirrors itself through others. When someone enters your life and feels significant from the start, it is not always about who they are on the surface. Sometimes it is about what they awaken within you. Hidden emotions, forgotten hopes, unspoken desires can suddenly rise without warning. The presence of another person can act like a reflection, showing you parts of yourself you were not fully aware of. This is why certain connections feel intense without explanation. Nothing dramatic needs to happen externally. The impact is internal. Over time, what begins as quiet curiosity can turn into emotional depth, even attachment, without either person fully realizing when the shift happened. And eventually there comes a point where pretending becomes heavier than truth. The need for honesty grows stronger than the fear of outcome. What was once hidden starts searching for expression, because emotions that are real do not disappear with time. They wait. They evolve in silence until the person carrying them finally becomes strong enough to speak. And when they do, it is rarely sudden. It feels like something that was always there finally finding its voice. It can feel immediate and powerful because the connection is not created only in the present moment. It seems to touch deeper emotional patterns already existing inside us. That is why certain people leave impressions that feel hard to explain later. One conversation feels heavier with meaning than many others combined. One presence feels strangely familiar, almost as if it was known before it was met. One brief encounter stays in memory long after everything else fades. And here's the part most people miss. So pay attention. When someone realizes they have been in love since the moment they met you, it rarely starts as certainty. It begins more like recognition. Something shifts in how they think. Conversations get replayed in their mind without effort. Small details that should have been forgotten stay alive. Your opinions start to matter more than expected. Your moods become easy to notice, and your absence creates a quiet emptiness that is difficult to name. At first, they may not understand these changes. In fact, many people resist them completely. The mind tries to explain it away. It says it is just admiration, just curiosity, just coincidence, something temporary, something safe. But emotions that rise from deeper layers do not disappear just because they are denied. Instead, they continue growing quietly. This creates an inner conflict that is not visible from the outside. Everything may still look normal. Conversations continue. Distance is maintained. Behavior remains controlled and rational. Yet internally, something very different is unfolding. Every interaction begins to carry emotional weight. They start noticing details about you that go far beyond surface attraction. How you think, how you react under pressure, how you speak when you are calm, how you move through situations others barely notice. Slowly, without realizing it, their attention stops being casual and starts becoming emotional. At a deeper level, the mind sometimes projects hidden parts of itself onto another person. In the beginning, what someone feels may look like attraction to an ideal image, but over time that image starts breaking down. Illusions fade, and what remains is something more real, more grounded, and harder to ignore. Strangely, if the feeling is genuine, it does not weaken at that point. It becomes stronger, because now it is no longer about imagination, it is about reality. The unconscious does not communicate in clear sentences. It speaks through repetition, through emotional echoes, through memories that keep returning without permission, through feelings that refuse to leave even when logic tries to remove them. And slowly, something becomes undeniable. This was not random. It was building quietly from the very beginning. Eventually, what was hidden starts pushing toward expression. A person begins to realize these emotions are not accidental. They are not temporary noise in the mind. They have been forming over time, silently, consistently, without interruption. And maybe that is why certain confessions feel so intense when they finally happen. They are not sudden emotions appearing out of nowhere. They are truths that have existed for a long time in silence, waiting for the moment courage finally catches up with feeling. Because the hardest part is rarely the emotion itself. It is the decision to finally admit what has already been known inside for far too long. And here is where it gets even more real. When someone starts feeling this from the very beginning, confusion is usually the first reaction, not clarity. They ask themselves questions they cannot easily answer. Why does this person feel so important? Why does one conversation stay in memory while so many others disappear? Why does their presence create calm, curiosity, or even longing at the same time? These questions don't come with immediate answers, and because of that, silence often continues. At the same time, people carry a visible version of themselves they show to the world, a controlled identity that appears calm, stable, and in charge. But underneath that surface, another layer exists where emotions, fears, and unspoken desires live. Love becomes complicated here because it challenges control. It asks for honesty. It forces vulnerability, and that is not easy for most people to accept. So they continue acting normal while experiencing something completely different inside. They reply casually while rereading messages later. They stay composed while remembering small moments others would forget. They behave as if everything is simple while carrying emotions that are anything but simple. Fear slowly enters the picture. Fear of rejection, fear of misunderstanding, fear of changing something that still feels uncertain, fear of saying too much too soon, and also fear of never saying anything at all. What many don't realize is that emotions like this do not disappear with avoidance. They stay, they grow, they wait, and over time, silence becomes heavier than expression ever could. The idea of the shadow also describes those parts of ourselves we hide, deny, or simply refuse to accept. And sometimes, hidden emotions become part of that inner shadow. A person may tell themselves that what they feel is too much, or not allowed, or something that should be controlled at all costs. But the shadow does not vanish just because it is ignored. It stays present, quietly shaping thoughts in the background. It waits for a moment when it can finally surface. Over time, a person begins to understand something important. Fear cannot permanently protect truth. What is real inside does not disappear just because it is avoided. They notice that their emotions have remained steady through everything. Distance did not erase them. Uncertainty did not weaken them. Silence did not end them. And slowly something changes. Honesty starts feeling less dangerous than hiding, less painful than carrying it alone. And maybe that is the quiet truth behind so many untold love stories. Not that the feeling was never there, but that it stayed unspoken for too long, because the mind was trying to protect itself from vulnerability, and in doing so it forgot that real connection was never asking for perfection. It was only asking to be acknowledged. Sometimes the bravest moment is not when someone falls in love. It is when they finally admit to themselves that they already have. Recognition of another person can feel sudden, almost timeless, as if it existed before understanding began. There are moments when someone enters your life, and nothing dramatic happens on the surface. Everything continues normally, routines remain unchanged, conversations look ordinary, but internally, something quietly shifts. A subtle awareness begins to form, like something deep inside has noticed a presence it does not want to forget. It is not always simple attraction, and it is rarely immediately understood. Instead, it feels like a strange familiarity without explanation, as if something within recognizes meaning before the mind can define it. And stay with this part, because it becomes more revealing the deeper it goes. Human beings carry an inner world beneath conscious awareness. A hidden space made of memories, emotions, desires, fears, and unfinished parts of the self. And not every connection begins through logic or planning. Sometimes two people meet, and one of them leaves with a feeling they cannot fully explain. They think about the conversation later. They replay small details. They wonder why certain moments feel heavier than they should. On the surface, nothing significant happened, but emotionally, something continues to echo. Time itself feels slightly different around that person. Even simple interactions begin to carry weight. Even silence feels meaningful. In many cases, relationships act like reflections. Certain people do not enter our lives only to be admired or understood easily. They reveal something hidden within us. Through them, we begin noticing emotions we had buried, qualities we ignored, or desires we never allowed ourselves to admit. Sometimes another person becomes important not because they complete something missing, but because they awaken something already inside. And when this kind of recognition happens, admiration is often accompanied by fear. The feeling becomes too real too quickly. Their presence starts affecting mood, attention, and thought. Even the idea of losing them feels uncomfortable before anything has even begun. That is why silence often becomes the chosen response. But silence does not stop emotion. It only changes where it lives. The person begins observing everything more closely. Conversations are remembered in detail. Expressions are analyzed later. Words are replayed long after they were spoken. Outwardly, everything remains calm. Internally, everything becomes active. A careful balance forms between appearing normal and feeling deeply. And over time, that balance becomes harder to maintain. The deeper mind rarely speaks in direct language. It communicates through repetition, emotional patterns, and moments that keep returning without invitation. Slowly, the person begins to understand that what they are feeling is not fading. It was never just a passing thought or temporary excitement. It has been growing quietly through time, through distance, through reflection. They start to see the real person more clearly, not an imagined version. And still the feeling does not disappear, because genuine connection is not about illusion. It is about recognition that continues even when fantasy is gone. Eventually, there comes a point where silence becomes heavier than expression. What was once hidden begins asking to be spoken. The feeling has already taken shape internally, and now it seeks release. From the outside, a confession may seem sudden, but internally, it has been forming for a long time. Every unspoken moment, every paused sentence, every held-back emotion has been building toward that point. And when it finally comes out, it is not the beginning of the feeling. It is simply the moment the feeling finally becomes visible. And here is something most people overlook. When emotions are carried since the very beginning, the mind goes through a long process before it ever reaches words. There is hesitation, doubt, restraint, and countless internal conversations that never reach anyone else. People often think love is spoken when it appears, but in reality it is spoken only when silence becomes impossible to maintain. Because some truths do not arrive suddenly. They arrive slowly, quietly, and then all at once when they can no longer stay hidden. They begin imagining different possibilities while still telling themselves not to expect anything. On the surface they remain calm, composed, normal. But inside there is a constant flow of thoughts that never reach the outside world, a quiet emotional storm that no one can see. This is where the inner journey becomes important. The process of becoming whole is not about becoming perfect. It is about slowly accepting what already exists within. Growth begins when a person stops avoiding their inner truth and starts acknowledging it instead. And in that process, something changes. A confession does not appear because life suddenly becomes easy or ideal. It appears because hiding it starts feeling heavier than speaking it. The person realizes an important shift has happened. Fear did not remove the feeling, silence did not erase it, and pretending did not return things to how they were before. Instead, the emotion stayed, quietly shaping thoughts, influencing decisions, and becoming part of their inner world. Stay with this part because it reveals something most people miss. They begin to understand something deeper. Control was never really in their hands. They cannot guarantee how the other person will respond. They cannot force understanding. They cannot decide whether the feeling will be returned. But they can choose honesty. They can choose to stop carrying something meaningful alone. And that is where courage begins. Not in the absence of fear, but in the decision that truth is more important than protection. When the moment finally arrives, the words may sound simple from the outside, almost ordinary, but behind them exists a long unseen story. Months of reflection, moments replayed in silence, feelings questioned again and again, internal battles no one witnessed, emotional growth that happened quietly in the background. That is why such confessions carry weight far beyond the words themselves. They are not sudden impulses. They are the result of someone slowly understanding themselves more deeply and choosing not to deny what they know anymore. At its core, this experience is not only about love directed toward another person. It is also about self-recognition. A person begins to see their own emotional depth more clearly through what they feel. They understand their fears, their attachment, their hesitation, and their vulnerability in a new way. For a long time, they may try to ignore what is happening inside them. They may rely on logic, distance, or silence to maintain control. But feelings that rise from deeper layers of the mind do not simply vanish through avoidance. They remain present, shaping perception and memory. And slowly, what was once hidden begins to influence everything. This entire journey becomes more than just emotional attachment. It turns into reflection, conflict, awareness, and eventually acceptance. Hidden attention, silent admiration, unspoken thoughts, and memories that refuse to fade all point toward one reality. What is real inside eventually seeks expression outside. There comes a moment when inner truth becomes too strong to remain contained. And when that moment arrives, it is not the beginning of emotion, it is the end of hiding it. And here is the deeper realization most people miss. The confession is never just about revealing feelings to someone else. It is also about finally acknowledging them within yourself. Because honesty does not only change relationships, it changes identity. It removes illusion and replaces it with clarity, even if that clarity feels uncomfortable at first. When fear finally loosens its grip, truth naturally moves forward. And perhaps that is the final understanding hidden inside all of this. Someone who has loved quietly, is not discovering a new emotion at the moment of confession. They are simply finally giving voice to something that has already been alive inside them for a long time. Because real connection is not just about meeting another person. It is about recognizing something within yourself through them that you could no longer ignore. And when that recognition becomes strong enough, silence is no longer possible. Truth becomes the only path forward. They start imagining different paths and outcomes, while still trying to tell themselves not to expect anything at all. On the outside, everything looks controlled, normal, almost effortless. They laugh when needed. They talk when required. They act like nothing unusual is happening. But inside, there is a completely different world running non-stop. Thoughts repeating, moments replaying, emotions building quietly in the background. And this is where something deeper begins to unfold. The process of becoming whole is not about becoming someone new. It is about slowly accepting what was already there from the start. Real growth begins when a person stops running away from what they feel and starts facing it honestly, even if it feels uncomfortable. A confession does not appear because life suddenly becomes perfect or easy. It appears because hiding it becomes more painful than expressing it. The person starts realizing a hard truth. Fear did not remove the emotion. Silence did not erase it. Distance did not weaken it. And pretending did not bring life back to normal. Instead, the feeling stayed. Quiet, constant, shaping thoughts, changing focus, influencing how they see everything around them. Stay with this for a moment, because this is where most people begin to understand what they missed before. Slowly, they begin to accept something even more important. Control was never fully in their hands. They cannot control the other person's reaction. They cannot force understanding. They cannot decide the outcome or guarantee acceptance. But one thing remains in their control, and that is honesty. The simple act of no longer carrying something meaningful alone. And this is where courage truly begins. Not as fear disappearing, but as fear being outgrown by truth. When the moment finally comes, the words spoken may sound simple, even ordinary to others. But behind those few words is a long hidden story, countless silent moments, endless thoughts never spoken out loud, memories replayed again and again in private, emotional battles fought alone, days of confusion, reflection, and silent attachment that no one ever saw. That is what gives the confession its weight. It is not sudden. It is built slowly over time until it can no longer stay inside. And here is the part people often overlook. So pay attention. This moment is not just about telling someone else how you feel. It is also about finally being honest with yourself. At its core, this entire experience goes far beyond attachment to another person. It becomes a journey of self-awareness. The person starts noticing their own emotional depth in ways they never did before. They begin to understand their fears, their hesitation, their vulnerability, and their longing more clearly. For a long time they may try to suppress it all using logic, distance, or silence, hoping it will fade away on its own. But emotions that come from deeper within do not disappear just because they are ignored. They stay, they echo, they influence how everything is felt and remembered. And over time, what was once hidden slowly becomes impossible to deny. Eventually, everything leads to one final realization. What is real inside always finds a way outward. There comes a point where inner truth becomes too strong to keep contained. And when that happens, silence is no longer protection. It becomes pressure. The confession is not the beginning of the feeling. It is the moment the feeling finally stops being hidden. And maybe the deepest truth in all of this is simple. Someone who has been silent about love for a long time is not discovering it at the moment they speak. They are only finally allowing it to be seen. Because real connection is not just about meeting someone else. It is about recognizing something within yourself through them that you can no longer ignore. And when that recognition becomes strong enough, staying silent is no longer possible. It naturally turns into truth spoken out loud. They begin imagining countless possibilities, while still trying to convince themselves not to expect anything at all from them. On the outside, everything continues to look normal and controlled. They smile when it is required. They respond when spoken to. They carry on with daily life as if nothing unusual is happening. But inside, a completely different reality is unfolding. Thoughts do not stop. Moments replay again and again without permission. Emotions quietly grow in places no one can see. And slowly, something deeper starts to take shape. This is where the inner transformation begins. Not with dramatic change, but with quiet realization. Becoming whole is not about becoming someone else. It is about finally accepting what was already present within. Real growth starts when a person stops running from their own emotions and begins to face them directly, even when it feels uncomfortable or uncertain. A confession does not appear because life suddenly becomes easy or perfect. It appears because carrying silence becomes heavier than speaking the truth. The person starts realizing something they can no longer ignore. Fear did not remove the feeling, time did not erase it, distance did not weaken it, and pretending did not return things to how they used to be. Instead, the emotion remained present, quietly shaping thoughts, influencing attention, and changing how everything is perceived. Stay with this moment, because this is where awareness begins to deepen in a way that cannot be reversed. Slowly, another realization starts to form. Control was never as complete as they once believed. They cannot control how the other person will respond. They cannot force understanding or guarantee acceptance. They cannot decide the outcome no matter how much they think about it. But there is still one thing within their reach, and that is honesty, the decision to no longer carry something meaningful alone. And this is where courage begins to take form, not as the absence of fear, but as the moment truth becomes more important than protection. When the confession finally happens, the words may sound simple and ordinary to anyone listening from the outside, but those words are carrying an entire hidden history. Silent moments that lasted for months or even years, thoughts that were never spoken out loud, conversations replayed endlessly in private, emotional battles fought alone without anyone noticing, moments of confusion, hope, restraint, and inner struggle that shaped everything leading up to that point. This is what gives the confession its weight. It is never sudden. It is the result of something that has been building quietly for a long time until it can no longer remain inside. And here is something important to understand. This moment is not only about revealing feelings to someone else, it is also about finally acknowledging them within oneself. At its core, the entire experience goes far beyond simple attraction or emotional attachment. It becomes a journey of self-recognition. The person begins to understand their own emotional depth in a way they never understood before. They start noticing their fears more clearly, their vulnerability more honestly, and their hidden longing more openly. For a long time, they may try to suppress all of it using logic, distance, or silence, hoping it will fade away naturally. But emotions that come from deeper layers of the mind do not disappear just because they are ignored. They remain active in the background. They influence thoughts, shape memories, and affect perception without being directly noticed. And over time, what was once hidden slowly becomes undeniable. Eventually, everything leads toward a single realization. What is real inside does not stay hidden forever. There comes a point where inner truth becomes too strong to suppress. And when that happens, silence stops feeling like safety and starts feeling like pressure. The confession is not the beginning of love. It is the moment love finally becomes visible after existing in silence for a long time. And perhaps the deepest understanding in all of this is simple yet powerful. Someone who has loved quietly for a long time is not discovering a new emotion when they speak. They are finally allowing something already true within them to come into the open. Because real connection is not only about meeting another person, it is about recognizing something inside yourself through them that can no longer be ignored. And once that recognition reaches a certain depth, silence loses its power, and truth naturally becomes something that has to be spoken.